She didn't arrive broken. She didn't arrive bitter. She arrived in a champagne silk dress, her own jewelry on her wrists, and a billionaire's hand resting gently at the small of her back. When the man who once left her alone, pregnant, and carrying a single suitcase down a cold hallway, had expected to find nothing but ruins. Jason Morales sent that invitation, thinking he knew exactly what he would see. He had no idea who Lauren Castillo had become, and neither, honestly, did she, until now. If this story is already pulling at something in your chest, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. I love knowing who's on this journey with me.
Hello, I'm David Kane, and this story has been waiting for you.
The alarm on Lauren Castillo's iPhone went off at 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes early, because Gabe had climbed into her bed around 4 and somehow reset it with his knee. She lay there in the grey November light, her son's warm weight pressed against her ribs, his small fist curled around a stuffed bear so worn that one eye was held on by a safety pin. She breathed him in, Johnson's shampoo, sleep, something sweet she couldn't name, and gave herself exactly 30 seconds of stillness before the day required her. This was the ritual, 30 seconds, then up. The apartment on Perry Street was small and deliberate, art prints chosen one by one, a kitchen island she had sanded and sealed herself while Gabe spent a weekend at her mother's, plants on the sill that had somehow survived 3 years of inconsistent watering. It was a home that looked like a choice, not a consolation, and that distinction mattered more than she would ever say aloud. Coffee by 7. Gabe's overnight oats from the fridge, his sneakers lined up by the door like 2 small soldiers. "Mama!" He appeared in the doorway, bear tucked under one arm, hair a spectacular disaster. "Is today a store day?" "Afternoon," she said. "School first." "Can I bring Theo?" He held up the bear with both hands, a formal presentation. "Theo has been to school 4 times this month and still hasn't learned his letters." Gabe considered this with tremendous seriousness. He's a slow learner. Lauren turned toward the cabinet so he wouldn't see her smile. "Get dressed, baby." By 9:15, she had unlocked the front door of Castillo & Co., her shop, her name, her handwriting in brushed brass on the window, and begun the quiet ceremony of opening. The West Village storefront was narrow and light-filled, wide plank floors, exposed brick painted warm off-white, shelves holding handmade jewelry, leather goods, ceramic pieces, and small accessories she had designed and sourced herself over 4 years of unglamorous, relentless work. It smelled of cedar and beeswax, and faintly of the soy candle she lit each morning by the register, a ritual she had started the week she signed the lease and never broken. She adjusted a display of hand-hammered brass earrings near the window, stepped back, moved 1 pair 2 inches left. Then she stood at the glass and looked out, yellow cabs cutting lanes, a dog walker managing 4 leashes, the couple arguing outside the coffee shop across the street, a delivery guy on an e-bike, threading through everything like he had been built for this specific chaos. She had built this. Not inherited it, not received it in any settlement. She had built it after the divorce papers, after the apartment, after the morning she sat on the edge of a hotel bathtub in Newark with both hands flat on her 6-month belly and understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that no one was coming, that the only person responsible for what happened next was the woman in that bathroom, the one staring back from the mirror above the sink, looking terrified and exhausted, and still, somehow, upright. 4 years ago. A different country entirely. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a text from her Santa Fe supplier confirming a turquoise shipment, a reminder for Gabe's checkup on Friday, a voice memo from Dana she hadn't opened yet. She set it face down and went to the back room to unpack a delivery. The morning moved in the rhythm she loved, the soft bell above the door, the playlist at just below conversation volume, customers who lingered and ones who already knew. She wrapped each purchase in tissue paper, the color of old maps, tied with thin cotton string with the kind of attention that made people feel, without knowing exactly why, that whatever they'd chosen was worth more for having been in her hands. It was never about the money. It was about the thing a woman proves to herself when she makes the quiet daily decision not to disappear. Just after noon, she was reviewing inventory on her iPad at the register when the bell above the door rang. She didn't look up. She was mid-count on a row of cuff bracelets and had learned not to lose her place. She would think about that later. About the last ordinary second before she raised her eyes, when everything in the room still belonged entirely to her, when the air was still predictable, when she still had no idea what was about to walk through the door and make itself at home in the edges of her life. Then she looked up. And the room changed, the way it does when light shifts without warning, sudden and total, before you have time to prepare. He didn't knock. Men like Sam Herrera never knocked. They simply arrived and the room rearranged itself accordingly. Lauren looked up from her iPad just as he stepped through the door of Castillo & Coam, and her first impression was purely practical. Tall, early 40s, wearing a charcoal wool overcoat that fit the way expensive things fit when someone doesn't think about the price. No shopping bag, no list visible. His eyes moved across the store with the quick, calibrating scan of someone who processed spaces the way other people processed spreadsheets. Efficiently, without sentiment. He was on his phone. "I need it before the 15th, he said into it, not breaking stride as he moved toward the nearest shelf. "No, before. Figure it out." He ended the call and slid the phone into his coat pocket in one motion, and only then did he look at her directly. "Corporate gift," he said. "Something that doesn't look like an airport." Lauren set down her iPad. "How many people?" 12. "Budget isn't the issue." "What's the occasion?" He paused, a brief flicker, like the question was slightly more complicated than he'd expected. "End of year. Team that closed a deal worth more than most companies see in a decade." "What do they care about?" "The people on the team." Another pause, longer this time. "I don't follow." "The gift will mean more if it connects to something real," Lauren said, keeping her voice even. "Do they have families? Do they travel? Are they the kind of people who actually sit down for dinner, or do they eat at their desks?" He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, somewhere between mild surprise and the beginning of what might, in different circumstances, become respect. "You're asking me if I know my own team." "I'm asking what would make them feel seen," she said. "There's a difference." Something shifted in the line of his jaw. He didn't answer immediately, and in the silence, Lauren moved out from behind the register and walked to the far shelf where she kept a curated set of leather travel cases, hand-stitched journals and small ceramic vessels made by a woman in Brooklyn who worked in a studio the size of a closet. "These," she said, lifting a slim leather wallet with a card slot and a slim brass clasp. "Or these." She held up a journal. Deep green cover, thick cream pages, the kind of object that felt important before you'd written a single word in it. "Depending on who they are." He crossed the room to where she stood. He was closer than necessary, though not inappropriately so, just the particular proximity of a man accustomed to taking up space without apology. He smelled of something clean and expensive. Cedar, maybe, or vetiver. He picked up the journal and turned it in his hands. "My assistant usually handles this," he said. "I know," Lauren replied. He looked up. "How?" "Because you came in without knowing what you wanted. You haven't smiled once, and you mentioned budget before you mentioned the people." She took the journal from his hands with a calm that surprised even herself. "Your assistant would have called ahead." For a full 3 seconds, Sam Herrera said absolutely nothing. Then, not a smile exactly, but the corner of his mouth moved in a way that suggested one was possible, somewhere in the near future, if the right conditions were met. "I'll take 12 of the journals," he said, "and 12 of the wallets. I only have 8 journals in stock. I can have the rest by Monday. I need them Friday." "Monday," she repeated without inflection. He studied her face, looking for the negotiation. He didn't find one. "Fine. Monday." He handed her a matte black business card. No logo, just a name, a number, and an email. "Send the invoice here." Lauren took the card without looking at it. She wrote up the order on her tablet, processed the deposit, and handed him a receipt. The entire transaction was precise and professional, and at no point did she offer him a discount or a faster turnaround, or any of the small accommodations people tended to offer men like him, simply because of the way they stood. He noticed. She could tell by the way he lingered a half-second too long at the door, one hand on the frame, before he pushed it open and walked back into the October afternoon without looking back. Lauren waited until the door closed, then turned the business card over in her fingers for the first time. Samuel Herrera, Herrera Capital Group. She set it on the counter beside the register. She had 3 more orders to pack and a supplier call at 3, and she was not, she told herself clearly, practically and without drama, going to think about the way his eyes had moved across the room like he was looking for something he hadn't expected to find. She didn't think about it. Not much, anyway. He came back on a Thursday. No call ahead, no text to the number on the receipt Lauren had sent with the order confirmation. Just the bell above the door at 2:14 in the afternoon, and Sam Herrera stepping inside with his hands in the pockets of a dark navy jacket, looking slightly less armored than the first time. No overcoat, no phone already raised to his ear. He looked almost like a regular person. Almost. Lauren was not alone. Gabe's daycare had called that morning with a mild fever scare that turned out to be nothing. The thermometer read 99.1, barely above normal, but the policy was clear, and so she had picked him up at 11 and set him up in the back corner of the store with his backpack, a container of crackers, and the battered wooden building blocks he carried everywhere like a traveling construction crew. He was there now on the floor between 2 shelves, building something enormous and structurally improbable, narrating the process to himself in a low, serious voice. Sam stopped just inside the door. His eyes found Lauren first. She was behind the register, watching him with an expression that was professionally neutral and personally curious, and then dropped to the small boy on the floor, who had not yet looked up because the tower was at a critical stage and some things required full concentration. "He's fine," Lauren said quietly. "Daycare policy. Fever was nothing." Sam nodded slowly, still looking at Gabe. "How old?" 4. Gabe chose that moment to look up, assess the stranger with the frank, unhurried evaluation that only small children and very confident adults can pull off, and then extend one arm toward the block pile beside him. "You can sit," Gabe said. Not an invitation exactly, more of a summons. Lauren watched Sam's face. She saw the precise moment he registered the instruction, a flicker of something unguarded, like a man who had not recently been summoned anywhere by anyone and found the experience quietly disorienting. He looked at Lauren. She gave him nothing, just the faintest lift of her eyebrows. He sat down on the floor. He did it without hesitation once he decided, folding himself down onto the hardwood in his good jacket, with the ease of a man setting aside for the moment all the expensive coordinates of his usual life. Gabe handed him a red block without ceremony and pointed to a gap near the base of the tower. "There," Gabe said. "There," Sam agreed and placed it. Lauren told herself she was watching to make sure Gabe wasn't being a nuisance. That was the reason she stayed in the doorway between the front of the store and the back corner, one shoulder against the frame, arms loosely crossed. That was the only reason. But what she was actually watching was the way Sam Herrera, a man whose company managed 9-figure assets, whose name appeared in technology journals and financial press, who had stood in her store days ago with the contained energy of someone for whom stillness was a professional discipline, was now stacking colored blocks on the floor with a 4-year-old, following instructions with complete seriousness, asking clarifying questions about load-bearing walls. "If we put the tall one here," Sam said, "it might fall when we add the roof." Gabe considered this. "We need a stronger base." Exactly what I was thinking. They worked in near silence for several minutes, the only sounds the soft knock of wood on wood and Gabe's occasional murmured corrections. Lauren noticed that Sam never tried to take over, never redirected the project toward something more efficient. He simply followed the 4-year-old's vision with patient, genuine attention, and there was something in that, something she hadn't expected and didn't know what to do with. 40 minutes passed. She knew, because she checked the clock twice and was embarrassed both times. When the tower was finally complete, improbably tall, leaning slightly left, crowned with a triangular block Gabe declared was the antenna, Gabe sat back on his heels, and looked at it with the satisfaction of a man surveying a finished cathedral. "The tallest building in the world," he announced. "Absolutely," Sam said. Gabe nodded once, accepting this as settled fact, then picked up his crackers and returned to his own quiet world with the efficiency of someone who had accomplished everything he came to do. Sam stood slowly, brushing his palms against his jacket, and turned toward the doorway where Lauren was still standing. She had not moved. She wasn't entirely sure she could have. His eyes met hers over the top of Gabe's head, just for a moment, just long enough, and something passed between them that was not a smile and not a question and not quite a word, but carried the weight of all three. Lauren looked away first. She moved back toward the register, straightening things that didn't need straightening, and told herself that her heart was beating fast because she'd been standing still too long. She almost believed it. He started bringing coffee. Not every day, and that would have been too obvious, and Sam Herrera was not, Lauren was learning, a man who did obvious things. But 3 times in the 2 weeks that followed, he appeared at Castillo & Co. with 2 cups from the place on Bleecker Street, set one on the counter without ceremony, and found some small reason to stay. The first time, he said he had a question about custom orders for a client. The question took 4 minutes. He stayed 40. The second time, he brought his laptop and asked if he could sit in the back while he finished a call. She said yes before she had fully decided to, and spent the next hour acutely aware of him at the small table behind the shelving unit, the low murmur of his voice, the particular focused quiet that settled over the store like a shift in atmospheric pressure. The third time, he brought no excuse at all. He simply set the coffee down, took the stool across from the register and said, "Tell me how you started this." Lauren looked at him for a moment. "Why?" "Because I've looked at your website, your press mentions, your wholesale accounts, and your supplier relationships," he said calmly. "And the growth curve doesn't match the capital you started with. I want to know what I'm missing." She should have found that clinical. Instead, she found it oddly respectful. The admission that he had looked, that he had tried to understand on his own before asking. $800 and a folding table at the Union Square Market, she said. "Every dollar I made went back in. No investors, no partners." "How long until the storefront?" 3 years. He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. "Most people would have taken outside money." "Most people would have," she agreed. "I didn't want to owe anyone anything." Something in his expression shifted, a quiet recognition, like a man hearing something in a language he hadn't expected to understand. He didn't push further on that thread, but she could tell he filed it somewhere. The conversations that followed moved in unexpected directions, from her sourcing process to his earliest company, a small software firm he'd built in his late 20s in a shared Austin office with bad air conditioning and unreliable Wi-Fi. He talked about it differently than he talked about Herrera Capital, with a looseness in his voice that made it sound like a place he still visited in memory when the current life got too polished to feel real. "You miss it," Lauren said one evening when the store had been closed for 20 minutes and neither of them had moved toward the door. Sam considered the word carefully. "I miss not knowing if it would work," he said. "There's a particular kind of attention you pay to something when it might fail. I don't pay that kind of attention to much anymore." Gabe was asleep on the small sofa in the back room, one arm around Theo, his breathing slow and even. The store was lit only by warm track lighting and the glow of Lauren's laptop, and the city outside had shifted into its nighttime register. Less horn, more siren, the particular hush that fell over the West Village after 10. "What made you walk away?" she asked. "The first company. I sold it." He looked at his hands. "For more money than I'd ever seen. I spent about a week feeling like I'd won, and then realized I'd traded the thing I loved for the thing I thought I was supposed to want." He paused. "I've been very good at that particular trade." Lauren was quiet for a moment. Outside, a cab passed, its headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling. "I know something about that," she said. He looked up. Their eyes held for a beat longer than conversation required, and in that beat lived the entire unspoken architecture of what had brought them both here, the choices, the losses, the versions of themselves they had set down somewhere along the way. Sam broke the silence first, but not with words. He stood and picked up his jacket from the back of the stool. "I should let you get home," he said. "Probably," Lauren agreed. He moved toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. The same pause she had noticed the very first day, in the same spot, like the threshold was always slightly harder to cross than it should have been. "Same time Thursday," he said, without turning around. Lauren looked at the sleeping boy in the back room, at the empty coffee cup on the counter, at the man in the doorway who had somehow, without any clear agreement, become a fixture in the quiet of her evenings. "Same time Thursday," she said. The door closed softly. The store felt different after, not empty exactly, more like a room that had just finished holding its breath, still warm from everything said and everything that hadn't. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, wedged between a supplier invoice and a postcard from Dana, who was in Lisbon sending proof of life in the form of badly lit pastry photographs. Lauren noticed it immediately, cream-colored, heavier than standard paper, the kind of stationery that announced itself before you opened it. The return address was a Chicago law firm, but the name in the upper left corner was the one she recognized, Jason Morales. She stood at the kitchen counter, still in the oversized sweater she'd slept in, Gabe eating cereal at the table behind her, cartoon sound effects drifting from his tablet. She read it once. Then she set it beside the coffee maker and went to make his toast. A wedding invitation. Jason was marrying someone named Claire Whitfield, the ceremony at the Grand Hotel in Chicago, black tie, the kind of event that required a calligrapher and a professionally managed seating chart. Inside, on a separate card in Jason's precise script, were 4 sentences. "Lauren, I'd love for you to be there. We've both moved forward. I think it would mean something." She buttered Gabe's toast and cut it diagonally the way he preferred. "Mama, the bunny is being mean to the duck," Gabe reported from behind his tablet. "Tell the duck to find better friends," Lauren said. She thought about Jason's handwriting, the controlled slant of it, the letters that never touched each other, leaving careful space between every word. She had once found that quality elegant. Now it read differently, like a man who had spent years ensuring nothing in his life ran together, including people. She knew exactly what the invitation was. Not goodwill, not genuine closure. It was a mirror. Jason holding one up to check her reflection, to see whether she would arrive diminished or simply absent, either of which would confirm something he needed to believe about their shared story. She told Sam about it that Thursday. She hadn't planned to. She was going to mention the turquoise shipment that arrived 2 stones short and the conversation she needed with her accountant about Q4 projections. But Sam arrived with coffee, sat across from her, and she heard herself say, "I got a wedding invitation from my ex-husband," in the same tone she might use to report a weather change. Sam set down his cup. She watched his face for the reaction she expected, the tightening jaw, the protective readiness, the instinct to position himself between her and the source of discomfort. It didn't come. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, eyes steady on hers, and then asked, "What do you want to do?" Lauren blinked. Of all the responses she had prepared, including the ones where she told him it was fine, she'd already decided, she had not readied herself for that one. Not because the question was complicated, but because no one had asked it. Not her mother, who called it a trap. Not Dana, who called it audacity. Not the version of herself that had been turning the envelope over for 2 days, searching for the answer embedded in the paper like a watermark. "I don't know yet," she said, the most honest thing she'd said about it. Sam nodded. "Okay. That's it? Just okay?" "You'll know when you know," he said, "and whatever you decide will be the right call. You don't make careless decisions." Lauren looked at him across the counter. The late afternoon light was coming through the front window at a low angle, catching the dust motes above the shelves and turning them briefly gold. Her phone buzzed on a back shelf, and she ignored it completely. "He wants to measure himself against whatever I've become," she said. "He's expecting ruins." "Then the question isn't whether to go," Sam said quietly. "It's who you want to be when you get there." Something loosened in Lauren's chest, a small stubborn knot she hadn't fully known existed until it moved. She picked up her coffee with both hands and looked down into it for a moment. "You're different than I expected," she said. When you first walked in here, what did you expect? She looked up. A man who already had all his answers. Sam's expression shifted into something she was beginning to recognize. That particular softening around his eyes, barely visible, that he seemed to have no control over. I have very few answers, he said. I'm just practiced at sounding like I do. Outside, the sky had gone the deep blue of early November evenings, and the streetlights on Bleecker had flickered on one by one, like small decisions being made in the dark. Lauren hadn't said yes to Chicago, but she hadn't said no either, and somewhere in the silence between them, they both already knew that the question was no longer just about the wedding. She said no on a Monday. She sent Sam a text at 8:47 a.m. while Gabe was brushing his teeth. I've been thinking about Chicago. I don't think it's a good idea for you to come. She set the phone face down and didn't look at it for 11 minutes, which was a personal record. His reply came in 3 words, okay, no pressure. She told herself she felt relieved. By Wednesday, she had changed her mind. She typed the message twice, deleted it twice, and finally sent it from the back room of the store, while a customer browsed up front. I think I'd like you there after all, if the offer still stands. She pressed send before she could reconsider, then picked up an empty shipping box and began repacking it with nothing inside, just to have something to do with her hands. It stands, he wrote back in under a minute. Saturday. She said no again on Thursday, not to Sam but to herself, standing in front of her bathroom mirror at 11 at night, rehearsing the version of events where she went to Chicago alone and proved something clean and uncomplicated. That version had appeal. It required nothing from anyone and asked no questions she wasn't ready to answer. Then Friday came, and Sam suggested Central Park. He said Gabe would enjoy the leaves, which was true. He said they could walk, and she didn't have to decide anything definitively, which was either generous or strategic, and possibly both. She agreed, and Saturday morning she dressed Gabe in his rust-colored puffer jacket and the boots with Velcro straps he could fasten himself, a point of enormous personal pride. And they met Sam at the 72nd Street entrance at 10. The park was the particular version of itself that existed for only 2 weeks each October, copper and amber, and a gold so saturated it looked almost artificial, leaves drifting at a pace that made the whole city seem to slow down in respect. Gabe ran immediately into a pile someone had raked to the curb and scattered it with the full dedication of a person dismantling something that should never have been assembled. Sam and Lauren walked behind him at the unhurried pace of 2 people who had, without discussing it, agreed not to rush today. You changed your mind twice, Sam said. Not an accusation, an observation, offered without weight. 3 times, actually, Lauren said. The second no was internal. He laughed, a real one, low and unguarded, and the sound of it did something to the air between them that she registered in her chest before her brain caught up. I'm not trying to complicate your life, he said. I know. She watched Gabe squat to examine something on the path. That's not what I'm afraid of. What are you afraid of? She was quiet for a moment. A jogger passed them, oblivious. 2 dogs strained toward each other across the path, tails furious with optimism. Needing someone again, she said, and being wrong about them. Sam didn't rush to fill the space after that. He let it sit, with patience, without the anxious need to resolve. They walked in silence for a few steps, and then Gabe doubled back at full speed, coat unzipped, holding up a leaf the size of his own face. Look, he said, thrusting it toward Sam with complete confidence it was a gift worth receiving. Sam took it with both hands and examined it seriously. This is a good one of the best I've seen today. Gabe beamed and ran back toward the trees. Lauren was watching Sam's face when he looked down at the leaf, the unperformed way he held it, like a man who had forgotten briefly to be anything other than present. Then he looked up and caught her watching, and neither of them looked away this time. His hand brushed the back of hers as he reached past her to catch Gabe's fallen scarf from a low branch. Half a second of contact, warm and unhurried, knuckles against knuckles. Neither of them commented. Both of them felt it land and settle. I'll come to Chicago, she said. Her voice was steady. Sam folded the scarf carefully and held it without speaking, the leaf still in his other hand, the park golden and loud with wind around them. "I know," he said simply. And the thing about the way he said it, without triumph, without relief, without anything resembling having won, was that it made her trust him more than any argument ever could have. Gabe reappeared at her side, breathless, pointing toward the fountain. "Can we go there?" "Yes," Lauren said. And they did, all three of them, moving together into the amber afternoon as if it was simply where they had always been headed. He showed up at 7:15 with 2 bags of Thai food and a bottle of wine he'd clearly chosen carefully, which meant Lauren had to tell him, the moment he crossed the threshold, that Gabe was still awake and the wine was going to have to wait. Sam looked at the bottle, then at Gabe, who was standing in the living room in his dinosaur pajamas, holding a plastic pterodactyl with the focused energy of a child who had no intention of sleeping for at least another hour. "Fair enough," Sam said, and set the bottle on the counter like a man who was genuinely unbothered. Gabe assessed him. "Did you bring food?" "I did." "Is it spicy?" "Some of it. I got yours not spicy." Gabe accepted this with a nod and returned to his pterodactyl, which apparently had somewhere important to be. Lauren caught Sam's eye over the kitchen island, and something passed between them. Not a word, just the particular warmth of 2 adults sharing a moment that belonged to the ordinary, unremarkable texture of an evening at home. She hadn't expected it to feel so natural. That was the part she hadn't prepared for. They ate on the living room floor because Gabe had arranged his dinosaurs across the entire surface of the dining table, and neither of them had the heart to relocate the exhibition. Sam sat cross-legged on the rug with his container of pad thai, listening with apparent genuine interest as Gabe explained that pterodactyls were not technically dinosaurs, a distinction Gabe found extremely important and had explained Lauren knew to no fewer than 7 adults in the past month. "Technically flying reptiles," Gabe confirmed with the gravity of a small professor. "I didn't know that," Sam said. He sounded like he meant it. "Most people don't," Gabe said generously. Lauren ate her green curry and said nothing, watching the two of them with something she was not yet ready to name. Something warm and slightly frightening, the way standing at the edge of something high is frightening, even when you know you're safe. By 8:45, Gabe had been read to, negotiated with, given water, reminded that his pterodactyl would be there in the morning, and finally surrendered to sleep with Theo tucked under one arm. Lauren stood in the doorway of his room for a moment, after his breathing slowed, listening to the particular quiet that only existed once he was under, deep and total, the whole apartment reorganizing itself around his rest. When she came back to the living room, Sam had cleared the containers, found a second wineglass she didn't remember owning, and opened the bottle after all. He was sitting on the floor again, back against the couch, 2 glasses on the coffee table in front of him. Lauren sat beside him, not across the table. Beside him, close enough that the warmth of his arm was a presence against hers, without them quite touching. He handed her a glass. She took it. For a while they didn't speak, and the silence was the comfortable kind, the kind that didn't need filling, that had weight and texture without being heavy. The city moved outside the window, a distant siren, the muffled bass from the bar 2 blocks east, a cab horn brief and indifferent. "I don't want to just come to Chicago with you," Sam said. His voice was quiet and even, the way it got when he was saying something that had been waiting for a long time to be said. He was looking at his glass, not at her. Lauren turned her head to look at his profile, the line of his jaw, the way his shoulders had dropped from the careful posture he wore everywhere else, the small muscle working just below his ear. "I want to be with you," he said. "Not as a gesture, not as backup. I want—" He paused, searching for the precise word, the way she had come to understand he always did, refusing the approximation. "I want the Tuesday mornings, the floor dinners, the pterodactyl lectures." He looked up then, finally, and his eyes met hers with a directness that had nowhere left to hide. "I want this." The apartment was very quiet. Gabe's sound machine hummed softly down the hall. The candle Lauren had lit before dinner was burning low on the kitchen counter, throwing soft, unsteady light across the ceiling. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached across the coffee table and set down her glass, and when she brought her hand back, she let her fingers rest on top of his, light at first, then deliberate, her hand folding over his knuckles with a steadiness that surprised her. His hand turned beneath hers and held on. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing yet that words could do that this couldn't. This simple, complete, terrifying thing of two people choosing to stop pretending they weren't already here. Outside, the city continued entirely without them, indifferent and bright. The limousine pulled up to the Grand Hotel at 6:48 p.m., and Lauren stepped out onto the Chicago sidewalk with the stillness of a woman who had decided, somewhere over Lake Michigan, that she was done performing smallness for anyone. She wore a champagne silk dress, fitted, simple, requiring a certain quality of posture to carry correctly, and she carried it correctly. At her wrist, a hand-hammered brass cuff from her own collection. At her ears, the oxidized silver drops she'd made herself 3 years ago in the back room of the store, on a Tuesday night when Gabe was asleep and she needed something to do with her hands besides worry. Her own work, on her own body, walking into the room her ex-husband had built for this exact moment. Sam stepped out behind her. Dark suit, no tie, the kind of effortless formal that came from wearing good clothes the way other men wore jeans. His hand found the small of her back, not possessively, not for show, just present, the lightest possible declaration. The hotel lobby was everything Jason would have chosen: soaring ceilings, dramatic ivory florals, the low roar of a crowd already several cocktails into the evening. A string quartet played near the bar that no one was listening to. Lauren found Jason across the room in under 10 seconds. He was talking to 2 men in suits, champagne in hand, wearing the satisfaction of the evening like a second jacket. He hadn't seen her yet. "Ready?" Sam said quietly, close to her ear. "Yes," she said, and meant it completely. They crossed the lobby together. A few people noticed Sam, the particular alertness that moved through certain rooms when someone of his weight entered, but Lauren watched only the moment Jason looked up and saw her. It lasted less than 3 seconds. She catalogued all of it. The flicker of surprise quickly managed. The fractional reassessment as his eyes moved once to Sam and back. The smile arriving a beat too late to be entirely natural. "Lauren." He kissed her cheek. "You look wonderful." "Thank you," she said. "Congratulations, Jason. I'm glad you found your person." She meant it. That was what she hadn't anticipated, standing in front of him and feeling nothing corrosive, nothing that burned. Only the clean clarity of a woman who had already closed the door from the inside and come here simply to confirm it was still closed. Jason shook Sam's hand and said his name with the precision of a man who had Googled it. Sam responded with the contained politeness of someone who found the entire interaction mildly interesting and nothing more. They stayed 40 minutes. Lauren greeted Claire, who was warm and clearly nervous and deserved none of whatever Jason had constructed to frame this evening. She drank 1 glass of champagne, ate 3 things off a passing tray, laughed genuinely twice, and at no point felt the need to prove anything to anyone in the room. That was all of it. That was the revolution, quiet and total. In the elevator up to their floor, Sam leaned against the mirrored wall and looked at her with an expression she had come to recognize as his version of awe. Not dramatic, not performed. Just the open quality his face got when something exceeded what he'd prepared himself for. "You were extraordinary in there," he said. Lauren glanced briefly at her reflection, the dress, the earrings she'd made herself, the woman who had walked in wearing her own work without apology. "I was just myself," she said. "I know," Sam said. "That's what I meant." The elevator opened onto a long hallway carpeted in deep charcoal, wall sconces throwing warm amber light in both directions. Chicago spread below the floor-to-ceiling windows at the end of the hall, an enormous grid of light, indifferent and beautiful. Sam was looking at her, not the city. "Lauren," he said. Just her name, low and deliberate, like a word he had been waiting to use correctly. She turned to face him fully. He reached up slowly and took her face in both hands, carefully the way you hold something you understand the value of, and the tenderness of it was almost more than she could absorb. This man who ran toward nothing slowly, who had spent weeks circling her life with patience and coffee and floor dinners and block towers, now standing completely still, holding her like she was worth being still for. She closed her eyes. The city blazed behind the glass. And in the last quiet moment before everything changed, she understood that she hadn't come to Chicago to face Jason at all. She had come to find out who she was now. And standing in the warmth of Sam's hands, she knew. Morning came through the wide hotel windows like something unhurried. The particular light of a November dawn over Chicago, pale gold and thin, the kind that didn't announce itself, but simply arrived and waited to be noticed. Lauren woke first. She lay still for a moment, the texture of hotel linen against her skin, the distant murmur of the city 40 floors below, Sam's breathing slow and even behind her. She didn't move right away. She gave herself a moment the way she gave herself 30 seconds every morning on Perry Street, except this was different, longer, the kind of moment she wanted to hold carefully, the way you cup water knowing it will find the gaps between your fingers. She reached for the robe folded on the chair and crossed the room. The city was enormous and grey-gold outside, Lake Michigan a dark, pewter line at the horizon, the buildings catching early light on their glass faces. On the wide sill, a coffee cup she hadn't heard being made, still warm. She stood at the glass with both hands around the cup and let herself feel, not analyze, not manage, not file away. Just feel. The warmth of the ceramic against her palms, the light spreading slowly over the water, the quiet fact that someone had woken before her, made coffee, and left it where she'd find it without needing to be thanked. That was the detail. That small and wordless thing was what undid her, standing at a hotel window in a city that wasn't hers. Behind her came the familiar shift of someone moving toward consciousness, a soft exhale, the slight redistribution of weight against the mattress. She didn't turn around yet. "You're already dressed," Sam said. Voice low, roughened by sleep, entirely unguarded the way voices are before a person has fully remembered to be anything. "Mostly," she said. A pause. She heard him sit up slowly. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Better than I have in a while." Simply, without softening it. She was done editing true things for other people's comfort. She heard him get up, unhurried, quiet, no performance in it. Then his presence behind her, close but not touching, both of them facing the city and the enormous pale sky above the lake. "How do you feel?" he asked. Lauren considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Outside, a plane crossed the sky in silence, its contrail dissolving slowly in the cold air. "Like something finished," she said, "and something started. At the same time." Sam was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's a good way to feel." She turned and found him closer than she'd expected, barely a foot away, hair disordered from sleep, holding his own cup in both hands, watching her with the expression she had come to understand was his most honest face, the one he didn't compose, the one that simply was. Something was different about him this morning. The careful architecture he wore in the world, the composed certainty, the measured words, the posture of a man who had learned rooms, responded to confidence, was entirely set aside. What remained was quieter and more solid. A man she trusted more for having seen him before he'd put any of it back on. "Thank you," she said, "for coming. You don't have to thank me." "I know. I wanted to anyway." He looked at her over the rim of his cup, with something she could only call tenderness, not the kind that protected itself from damage, but the kind that had decided to stay regardless of cost. "What happens when we get back to New York?" he asked. A real question, not rhetorical, not leading, genuinely asking what this looks like now, what they call it, what she is willing to hold. The plainness of it, with nothing concealed in the phrasing, made her chest ache in the best possible way. She set her cup on the sill. Then she turned fully toward him and looked at his face, this careful, complicated, surprisingly gentle man who had sat on her floor and stacked blocks and brought coffee without being asked, and waited, patient as weather, for her to be ready. "I think," she said, "that you keep showing up." Sam's expression shifted, that small, honest movement at the corner of his mouth that was more real than most people's full smiles. "I can do that," he said. Outside, Chicago was waking fully, the lake going silver in the strengthening light, the city resuming its enormous ordinary life, unaware that something small and irreversible had just been decided 40 floors above it. Lauren picked up her coffee. Sam picked up his. They stood together at the window, shoulders nearly touching, watching the light move across the water, and neither reached for more words, because some things, once chosen, don't require them to become real. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Lauren was at the store alone doing inventory on her laptop with a cold coffee at her elbow when she heard the mail slot click. She finished the row she was counting before she walked to the front door and picked up the envelope. Law firm return address, Chicago postmark. She recognized the letterhead before she finished unfolding the page. It was from Jason's attorney. A formal proposal. Castillo & Co. would provide design and creative direction. His new lifestyle venture would provide capital and distribution. The language was careful and generous and buried the actual structure 6 paragraphs down. Castillo & Comas would operate as a subsidiary, brand decisions subject to board approval. A subsidiary. She read the whole thing standing in the middle of the store, still in her coat, and when she finished, she folded it once along its original crease and set it on the counter beside the register. Then she went to the back room, sat down, and stayed very still for about 4 minutes. She knew exactly what this was. Not an opportunity, the last move of a man who had never learned the difference between acquiring something and understanding its value. He had watched her build Castillo & Co. from a folding table into a brand with a wait list and wholesale accounts in 3 cities, and his response was to find a way to put his name above hers. She wrote back that afternoon, 1 sentence on her own letterhead, "This is not for sale." She sent it from her business email at 3:47 p.m. and felt, the moment it left her outbox, the satisfaction of a door closing with exactly the right amount of force. Not a slam, a click. Final. She texted Sam a photo of the sent email without context. His reply came in under 2 minutes. Good. Then, "Gabe and I built something today. You should see it." She smiled before she could decide whether to. Sam had taken Gabe for the weekend, their second time following an afternoon that had ended, with a promise about a larger construction project Gabe had tracked with the precision of a small auditor. Lauren had packed his overnight bag with pajamas, and Theo, and a note about bedtime. Sam had read it carefully. She knew because he sent back one question. Does he need white noise or is the sound machine optional? She had stood in her kitchen holding her phone and felt something she didn't have a clean word for. Something between trust and relief, and a tenderness she had stopped trying to name. When they walked through the door Sunday afternoon, Gabe arrived first at speed, and Lauren caught him against her chest and pressed her face into his hair. "We built a bridge," he announced, pulling back with urgency. "A real one with supports. Structural integrity," Sam confirmed from the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching them with the expression she had come to love, steady, warm, slightly undone at the edges. "He's going to be an engineer," Lauren said. "He already is," Sam said. Gabe had already moved on, exploring the shelves with his usual proprietary energy, setting things back with the care of someone who had learned the objects here mattered. Sam crossed the store and stopped in front of her. He didn't speak immediately, just looked at her the way he had from the beginning, with a tension that felt like being read by someone fluent in a language you'd been speaking alone for years. "I saw the email," he said. "I know. I sent it to you. You didn't need my opinion." "I know that too. I sent it because I wanted you to know." Something crossed his face, not surprise, more like the quiet arrival of something he had waited for without pushing. "I've been in love with you," he said, "since the day you refused to give me the journals early." Lauren looked at him. Behind her, Gabe was narrating quietly to a ceramic bird on the 3rd shelf, a whole private story about where it was going and why. She laughed first, the sudden laugh of a woman who has held a feeling at arm's length so long that its arrival sounds almost like relief. Then she kissed him. It was unhurried and certain, the way things are when they've been decided long before they happen. When she stepped back, Gabe was still talking to the bird, not looking up, because for him, this had already been normal for some time. "I'm in love with you too," she said. "Since the blocks." He smiled, full and real and entirely uncontrolled. And in the store Lauren Castillo had built with $800 and her own 2 hands on an ordinary Sunday in December, something that had been broken for a long time, quietly, in layers, below everything she had built above it, finally healed. He invited her expecting to find wreckage. She arrived whole, and that was the only answer she ever needed to give him. Lauren didn't rebuild herself for anyone's applause. She did it in the quiet, in the early mornings, before anyone was watching. And when love came, it arrived not as a rescue but as a recognition. Two people who had learned the hard way that the most important thing you can build is the courage to be seen clearly. Sometimes healing doesn't announce itself. It arrives like November light, unhurried, without fanfare, settling into the places you forgot were cold. What have you been building in the quiet, and who deserves to see it? If this story touched something real in you, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. I love knowing you're here.
This chapter has ended, but another one is already waiting for you.